right, so good, you ready? Okay, so we're going to talk about the sacraments, and I don't want to just talk about, sorry, I've done it already. I don't want to talk about just the things that we call sacraments in church, but the whole idea of the sacramental principle, which is very different to me than just those things that we talk about in church. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So for me, thank you. So for me, the sacramental principle means to see God in all created things. It's based on the conviction that God is revealed in all of the created world. And I'm sure you're not surprised that that's coming out of my mouth. But I'm not the only one that feels that way. That really is how we feel as a church. And I'll start with Lewis Weil, who was my liturgy professor at CDSP, probably the most respected liturgist in the Episcopal Church. And that's what Lewis always said. It's all about seeing God in everything in the created world. And that's why, of course, I think it is absolutely sacramental walking in a slot canyon and discovering the beauty of that experience, which has connected me to God in all the time in various different ways. But the point is that ordinary things can be an instrument of grace, and that a physical object can bear the holy. And that's why we use normal things for all of our sacramental actions. Water for baptism, bread and wine for communion. They're elements that either humans have created out of what God has given us, or they're the actual essence of what God's given us. So for me, a sacrament is an access to God. The old definition of a sacrament is in the prayer book. Do we have prayer books out? Like somebody can just read it. Somebody can just grab a prayer book. We don't have to get everybody. There's some around. Anyway, somebody turn to page 857. And maybe somebody knows off the top of their head before we say it out of the book. Does anybody remember the classic definition of the sacrament? Go ahead.
An outward visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
Right. So that's
What does that mean?
That's the Baltimore Catechism definition of the saints.
We didn't hear it.
Of the sacrament. Say it again.
An outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. An outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
That sounds.
So, I think I tell this story every year at this point, but it's such a good analogy that I'm going to keep using it. So, in my last parish in Page, we had this crazy, amazing group of kids there. Just brilliant kids that all came together at the same time, and they really were quite the group. But one of them was Anna Atkinson, and some of you that have been here well know Anna. Anna came here, went to U of A, went with Adrian. Adrian was the one that committed suicide. Anna came with Adrian. And when Anna, so anyway, she was here, blonde hair. It was red and green in colors for a little while there, but anyway, she kind of sat in the back on the epistle side of the church. Nobody seems to be remembering her, but that's okay. So when Anna was in their family, the Atkinson family, they decided that their children were going to make their own decision about being baptized. That they would not baptize their children as babies, because of what we talked about. That now, we believe that adult baptism is normative. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So they made that decision. So they let their kids make their own decision when they got to 7 or 8. Okay? So Anna was 7, and so we're finishing the baptism stuff. So I just said, Anna, so you know the definition in prayer book, so what does that mean to you? And she says, it means that the world is seeing something happening to the outside of you, but it's already happened inside of you.
Wow, 7 years old?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. So I just stopped, and I
Oh,
said,
what
and
insight.
yeah, kids usually get sacraments better than adults,
Yeah.
because they're not afraid to suspend their belief like we are, and they usually get it much better. The descriptions of communion that I've had from kids are so much better than what most of us articulate. So anyway, so I just give that to you for what it's worth. So I think that's what that means. I think Anna had it pretty much on the head. Anna, by the way, is in Delaware right now, working as a set decorator. So she said hi about 6 months ago. So, all right. Okay. So a sacrament means that one thing becomes the sign of another reality. It's a sign of the reality, not an imitation of it. And I think that's important. Signs and symbols are very important to us. And some people say, well, it's not the real thing. Like the whole discussion around bread and wine becoming body and blood, and the whole transubstantiation thing that we talked about in the first class. Some people say, well, you don't really believe that. You believe that it's a symbol, that it's not really the thing. Well, for me, a symbol is the most important thing that we do as human beings, is to symbolize something. Because it means that something is so powerful and so amazing that the only way that we can figure out what it is to symbolize it, is to come up with a symbol to represent what it is. That's a sacrament. That's what sacraments are all about. So in the Roman Rite, there are 7 recognized sacramental actions, as many of you know. And in the Protestant liturgical tradition, there are 2, which are?
Baptism.
Right. So what is the Episcopal answer to that? Whether there are 2 or 7?
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So you can read that in the book, page 858 is the deal there. Somebody wants to read that out loud.
What is holy baptism? Is that what you want?
Let me. No, not that one. Guess that would help to tell you which one.
What is the outward and visible sign of baptism?
No, the one above. Yeah. So we just did that one. So the one right before baptism.
What is holy baptism?
The one before baptism. The one above.
What are the 2 great
That's it.
sacraments of the
What are the-
gospel?
Yeah.
The 2 great sacraments given by Christ to his church are holy baptism and the Holy Eucharist.
Okay. So that's how we solve it then. Rather than saying how many sacraments there are, we say, what are the 2 great sacraments? Baptism and Eucharist. Okay. But that doesn't mean that it's limited to that. And of course, that's the important thing there. So they finish that on page 860. So under other sacramental rites, the first question there.
What other sacramental rites involved in the church under the guidance of the Holy Spirit?
So then they list them.
Other sacramental rites which evolved in the church include confirmation, ordination, holy matrimony, reconciliation of a penitent, and unction.
Right. Sometimes referred to as last rites. We're trying not to use those words anymore.
Why?
Okay. Why?
Yeah.
Because I have enough trouble when I visit someone in the hospital. I walk in the room, and this has happened to me a dozen times. I walked into the room, somebody I don't know, and they said, "I'm dying." Nobody told me I was dying.
Dear me, oh,
Just because you're there?
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
When
yeah.
somebody walks in the room with a collar on, and,
Right, and they
yeah,
think,
so
oh,
they
they're super
immediately
aware.
think
I don't
I'm there to do last rites. Yeah.
Old timers.
So it's,
Yes.
it's a big deal. So we don't use those words anymore for that reason. When we're going to talk about this, but the service as we have it set up in the prayer book is quite beautiful and quite moving, and it can happen for anybody anytime. How would I know if somebody's going to die or not?
What's it called now?
So we're actually struggling with that. Unction is what it says in the book. Yeah.
I don't like it.
I don't like that.
So we refer to it as ministration for the sick, sacrament of the sick, words like that.
I like that better. That's better.
yeah.
Those are just softer.
It is softer. I don't like any of them yet,
Yeah.
but
But
I
they're softer
think
than the first
they're
one.
they're better. But you know, I've done ministration at the time of death for people a dozen times. You know.
Same person?
Yeah. because they rally and come back, and it's great and it's wonderful. So I mean, one English lady I did, she said, "Let's do it again."
Popular.
She was a
God.
Anyway, you get the point. So what I want to tell you is
Humor and everything.
that I would suggest that this whole discussion of how many sacraments there are is really silly, because I think it misses the point. Because if we see God in all created things, and God can be revealed to us throughout all of creation, then everything we do has the potential of being sacramental. And that's what this is all about. That's what church is all about. It's to create a situation so that everything that you do in your life can be a part of the sacred. A sacrament then for me is any place or moment where we encounter God. So I really think it's limiting and misrepresents what we're doing when we say these things are sacraments and other things aren't. But we'll talk about them. So that one, death, you know, we have this sacramental action that we do near someone's death, but the act of dying itself is the most sacramental thing that I've ever experienced, is being with someone as they're dying and being with, going through that process with them. I mean, it's just,
It's amazing.
it really is. It's incredible things happen in that period of time. Some of the best moments in my life have been sitting with someone as they're dying and them being, especially when they're able to process their whole life. It's such a beautiful thing. It's so great. It takes everything out of you in that process, but it's such a wonderful thing. Another sacramental rite that we do in church that we never call a sacrament is coming up on Maundy Thursday, the beginning of Holy Week, foot washing. We only do foot washing one day a year in the church, but I think it represents everything that we are as human beings and trying to be like Jesus. Talking about a great symbol, washing someone's feet, there are so many levels of what's happening there. It is a great sacramental action. Mennonites wash people's feet all the time. They do it in the liturgy on a regular basis. And there may be something to that, because I think it definitely is a very sacramental moment. I can't tell you how many people's lives have been changed in the midst of foot washing. I can think of a dozen people whose lives totally changed in the midst of that action. If that's not sacramental, I don't know what is. So I'm not going to suggest there's a certain number of sacraments, but rather it's the sacramental nature of the church which is manifested in certain acts. That's how I see what we're doing, and that's what we'll talk about. We'll talk about those major acts, but please don't limit that to what sacraments are all about, okay? The one thing that I can say about sacraments for us is that they're never private. Sacramental actions presume a community, and they only happen in community. And that's why in this church, some people have taken to themselves to share in the words of institution in the Eucharistic prayer with the celebrant. Some of you say them out loud with me. You did today. And I personally think that is a perfect representation of what's happening in the sacraments, because what's going on there is what's happening when we gather as community. So saying that together is, in my mind, the most beautiful way to do that. Our bishop is not in that same place liturgically, and this is very typical in the Episcopal Church that we have differences of opinion on that. And I honor him for that, and that's why they're not in the bulletin. But for me personally, I think that is a lovely representation of what happens when we gather together. And it only happens when we gather together. I don't ever want to get back to this Middle Age thing where I'm doing something magic behind a curtain and nobody's paying any attention. It just doesn't make any sense. So, okay. All right. Okay. So the meaning of sacraments in our church is always public and it's always shared. This is not a private club. This makes us very different than, for example, the LDS Church, where all sacramental actions are done in private. So private that I've never been able to see any of them, including a wedding. So their understanding of this is almost exactly the opposite of ours. They believe that this is a private action between whoever it is and God. And we believe this is a public thing that only happens in the midst of community. That's why we do baptism in the centerpiece of a Sunday service.
I was, when I lived north of Logan, in a purely LDS community.
Yep.
I was involved in, with a young man's, what they call ordination when they turn 12.
Right.
I don't know why, myself as not being an LDS member of their community,
Right.
the family of the 12-year-old invited me to participate in kind of the laying on of hands.
Wow.
Oh, my.
And
Yeah, that's
it's
surprising.
done, and I'm not even supposed to go to the temple.
No.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
Right.
So,
Oh, no.
but I was there,
Wow.
and
In
they
the
use
temple?
these, they're really small rooms. They're like to the door,
Yeah.
square,
Huh.
very small.
Uh-huh.
And there's like hundreds of them in this great big building,
Yep.
Huh.
where their different activities take place.
Wow.
Weddings are done there.
Yeah.
Everything is done in those tiny rooms. So I
I see.
was very surprised by that.
Wow. What a gift.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's great.
That totally shocks me,
Yeah.
having been in the church
Of
for
course.
so many years. Civil weddings could occur in the chapel,
Right.
but they couldn't go up to
Civil.
the altar. They called it the stand.
Right.
You had communion, which was water.
Right.
And bread, yes, white bread.
As
Wonder
far
bread.
as the temple, that's where baptisms for the dead and everything, and the only people you're sharing with are the same brainwashed group that you're in.
Trying to avoid
After
the
I
majority
joined
vote.
in 1964, and I was released from it in 1996.
Wow.
And I taught every course you can teach, and you're absolutely right. There's no community unless you
Well,
walk
it's a
the
different
walk.
understanding of
Totally
sacrament.
different,
And
yeah.
that's all I'm trying
Their
to point
community
out.
is done quite differently,
Totally.
just very quickly.
Yeah,
They have, once a week, a home teacher comes by.
yeah,
Right.
And so there's a lot of community in that. If somebody in their church is in trouble, there are a lot of people that will surround that person.
depending on how well they respond to what the bishop informs them they have
That's
to
true.
do. There's
Yeah.
always
And the money and
conditions.
all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But the family home evening and that is an excellent program.
Yes, it is.
There's no question.
Charlie?
I'm from the Washington DC area. I was there when they built the Washington DC temple. I was a Mormon then, and I was called to be a baptizer in the temple,
Okay.
okay? I would go in, I'd have, change clothes, I'd put on a white suit, I would go in this tub,
Right?
and I would
Baptize
baptize
people for the dead.
people for the dead.
Mhm.
One time they said, I was getting ready to go home, he said, well, we need to baptize 75, 80, 100 people or something like that.
Right.
And they gotta be done today.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
they said, would you baptize them? And I said, well, yeah, I
That was
can.
it.
That's when I met Phyllis.
100
I didn't know-
Czechoslovakian women that nobody could pronounce
And
their
I said, well, I
names.
can't pronounce the name. She said, that's all right, just spell them.
Just spell
Oh,
it.
dear.
So I,
Take forever.
Okay.
so I just, thanked her, and
It's a
And
whole different
it's a different
understanding of
understanding, so.
everything.
Right. And so I want to save that discussion.
Yeah.
I can see by the look on your faces that some of you are puzzled by what goes on in that process.
Oh,
and
yeah.
what that's all about. So, but let's save that discussion for the last class when we're talking about all the
Okay.
denominations.
Okay.
And we can talk a little bit more about that,
Okay.
so we can fill in some of those blanks. But yes, LDS folks baptize people who have already died and people who haven't died too.
Oh, yeah.
But, okay, well, we'll get into it, okay?
The genealogy.
All right, so back in my last parish again, with all those brilliant kids, we also had some of their brilliant parents. And when I did this part of Episcopal 101, one of them, Tammy Poling, who is now in Australia, who we just, remember a few weeks ago, we sent them off to
Yes,
Australia?
yes.
Yeah.
So Tammy Poling says to me, smart aleck that she is, well, if all of our sacraments are public, then what about confession?
Well, in the Orthodox Church
and
is
Tam-
supposed to be public.
What's that?
In the Orthodox Church isn't supposed to be public.
It is, and that's the reasoning, because, and remember that we are tied very much to the Orthodox tradition, much more than the Roman tradition, and that's part of the same reasoning. So let's remember that, how do we usually do confession in the church? We did it today. We do a public confession, and we do it in community all together. But we also recognize that there is a need for people to have a therapeutic way to release what they've done, and we can't do that publicly. I mean, I can't put everybody in a position where they say publicly out loud what they've done wrong. We can't do that. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So we have this right of private confession, and we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes, because we realize that there is a need for that also. But our general right of confession is a public confession. We do it. Okay? And we'll talk about those as we go through. Okay? All right. So individual sacraments allow us to illuminate the presence of God in the world in an all-encompassing fashion. They suggest a mystery so deep that they can't be captured in a single reality. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. All of our lives can be sacramental. Every ordinary experience can be links to God. What our individual sacraments are supposed to do is point us to the sacramentality in everyday life. Okay? That's the whole idea of all those things we do, is so that we go in the real world and go, this is it. This is what baptism's all about. Okay? All right, so I'm going to talk about each one a little bit. Okay?